Hello everybody, today we're going to be talking about a hidden camo mechanic in World of Tanks which I can almost guarantee you've never heard about. So I'm going to start off this video with a quick demonstration to just show you right off the bat what we're talking about today. I do have to warn you, this video will have some math in it, and the mechanic is not exactly something you'll encounter very often, but it's still pretty useful to know about. So here we go, we're here on Fjords, or sorry, not Fjords, Fisherman's Bay. I've got a 60p on the enemy team. He has 452 V range, which he told me. And right now, as you can see from the indicator, I'm 462 meters away. And I am inside a bush, as you can see right here. Inside a bush completely. 463 meters now. I fire. He has direct line of sight with me with his mantlet, and yet I still don't get spotted from 463 meters away. Now I drive out in the open, no longer covered by a bush. And as you'll see, I back up before I shoot, 365 meters away, so even further away than I was when I shot before. And boom, when I fire, I get lit. So a lot of you are probably pretty confused right now as to what's happening and why I would get lit there where I didn't get lit before. And that's what I'm going to explain in this video. So a lot of people, what they don't know is in World of Tanks, there's multiple ways to get camo. There's your tank's stationary camo, there's your tank's camo while firing, and your tank's camo while moving, and the combination of those options, firing while moving, etc. But then there's also camo from bushes. So if you're 15 meters behind a bush, as many of you know, when the bush is opaque, and you fire, you retain the camo from that bush, and it's 50% camo for all bushes that have green leaves on them. So even if you're in a mouse, if the bush is completely covering you, if you fire and you're 15 meters behind the bush, you'll retain 50% camouflage from that bush. But there's actually one more way of getting camo in this game, which almost nobody knows about, and that's when you're inside a bush, but the bush is not opaque and you fire. So when the bush is opaque and you fire, or sorry, transparent, but you fire through it, a lot of people think you lose all the camo that the bush offers you, but that's not actually true. So the bush will actually retain some of that camo. And in this video, basically what I'm going to cover is how much camo you actually retain. And spoiler alert, it depends on basically what caliber of gun your tank has. So for the T100, for example, the T100 retains about 11% camo from the bush while firing, and that's not including the camo that it naturally just has after firing. So I'm gonna quickly cut, and we'll go to the garage and I'll explain some things. All right, so I decided not to go to the garage for this. Instead, I'm gonna talk about something real quick. So subscribers of this channel may remember about a year ago I released a video called something like "You Don't Know About This Hidden Mechanic in World of Tanks." And in that video, which was based on something that I remember I read probably like 10 years ago on the World of Tanks wiki, I tried to discover or explain a mechanic which I saw on the wiki, and the mechanic was that you retain a percentage of your camouflage while firing inside a bush, even when it's transparent. And in that video, I did a lot of testing because the wiki was very vague, and it didn't really include the details of how it worked. In fact, it included details which were completely incorrect and actually misleading as to how it actually works. And what I determined in that video was that the caliber of your gun determines how much extra camo you get from the bush. So as you can see here, if you have a really small gun, 25 millimeters, we tested it with an AM30 Gendron, you get 15% extra camo from the bush, which is actually a lot of camo. And then on the other side, T92 artillery with 240 millimeters caliber gun only retains 3% of camo from the bush. And then basically, as you can see from this graph here, the camo you get from the bush relates to the caliber of your gun. But as you can see, the relationship isn't exactly perfect. There's some variance here which doesn't quite add up. And so someone in my comment sections, his name was, I believe, Cleopon. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but he's a European, I believe. He put a comment on my video because he was actually investigating the same exact thing as me. And he actually found a better relationship than gun caliber for determining the camo value retained from the bush, and his method and his variable that he uses to calculate it is actually quite a bit more accurate. So as you can see on this graph, the R² value, which is a measure of how tightly the data fits with the graph, is 0.94. Over here, it's 0.985, which is closer to 1. A relationship of 1 R² value is a perfect relationship between the data and the line of best fit, the equation you use to determine it. So basically, the points are a lot closer to the line. And the value he used is a little bit more complicated. It's called the RF/camo ratio value. And what that is the ratio of your tank's camo while firing to its camo while stationary. So let's look at the T100, for example. Its camo while firing is 11.48, and its camo while stationary is 52.19. So if you do 11.48 divided by 52.9, that will give you the RF value, which is what he uses to predict basically how much camo you'll retain from the bush. Now, my original video was not completely wrong, because the RF value of all the tanks, regardless of how much camo skill it has on it or whatever, it basically correlates almost perfectly with your gun caliber. So gun caliber is still a good heuristic for figuring out how much camo you're going to retain from the bush. But for example, if you're in a bat chat and you have a 105 mil gun, or you're like an EBR with a 105 mil gun, or Sturv, or 30B, etc., then it'll be around, if you look on the graph, let's see, well, let's look at the gun caliber one, 105, it's going to be, according to the line of best fit, around 11% camo, between 10 and 15, 11% or so, and that's what I found, it's around 10 to 11%, and from the RF value, the RF of the bat jet, for example, is 0.197, and so that's around here, and if we go up here, it's around 10% camo from the bush, and so they kind of they add up to each other. They make sense together. So I'm gonna pause real quick. Now, all of this information is all well and good, except it's pretty hard to actually figure out how to use this in practice, because you might know that you're getting extra camouflage from the bush, even though it's transparent when you're firing, but you won't actually know or be able to determine very accurately how far away you will be spotted, even knowing that information. And so for that reason, I've made a handy dandy calculator here. Again, you can find this spreadsheet in the description. And we're just going to go through a couple examples and show you kind of what you can expect as in terms of how far away you can be while firing inside a bush. And keep in mind, you can just plug in the numbers yourself in this calculator, and you can determine roughly how far away you can be before they'll spot you while firing in a bush. So for our first example, let's use the E50M. Not sure if I'll do one or two examples, but we'll see. So here, the E50M has 3.85% firing camo. So when it's firing in an open field, it'll have 3.85% camo. And while stationary, it has 18.42% camo. So here in this calculator, I just plug in for the firing camo 3.85 and the stationary camo 18.42. And right here on the right, this will give us the predicted camo when you're firing in a bush. So this will add, basically what this box tells you is what your vehicle's effective total camouflage is when you're firing in a bush, and that value is determined by adding your base percent camo while firing, which you get even when in an open field, and it adds it to this here, the camo that you get from the bush itself. So you get roughly 4% camo from just your tank itself, and then you get the rest, like 11% camo from the bush itself. I'll go into the maths of that later and how I calculate it, but we're not going to go over that until the end of the video. But now that we have that value, 14.55% camo, which is quite a lot of camo, by the way. That's like the same level of camo that you get in a E50M with full camo skill when you're just moving and not firing. So that's pretty good. But let's just say you're fighting against the 60p, which has 452 view range. This 60p here, you can see 452 view range. In this box here, you plug in what you think your enemy's view range will be, which usually what I do is I just assume it's going to be like, for a tier 10 heavy, 470 view range, because no tier 10 heavy has more than 470 view range unless they use bond vents and food, or just like vents and food. And most heavies don't run vents. So I'll just plug in 470 into this equation to be safe. But let's just, for example, say we'll assume that it's the 60p with 452. Then in this box here, it will tell you the predicted distance that you will get spotted if you're closer than this when you're firing in a bush. So for the E50M in particular, against the 60p with 452 view range, you will not get spotted unless you're closer than 393 meters away, which is pretty absurd because it's an E50M after all. It doesn't have good camo while firing, and yet it still will only get spotted from 393 meters away. Now keep in mind, the E50M has a 105 millimeter gun. For tanks that have higher caliber guns, like a lot of tank destroyers, this number will, you'll get spotted from a further distance. And then the other thing to keep in mind is your vehicle's base camo. So for example, a T100, or let's just use the EBR as an example. Even though the EBR has a 105 millimeter gun, its base camo while firing, as you can see, is 10%. So even though it's getting around the same amount from the bush as the E50M is getting, its base camo while firing is higher, so the effective distance it can fire in a bush from will be lower, so it won't get spotted until a closer distance than an E50M, despite that the same caliber of gun. So 393, there's actually a lot of instances where you can use this. And keep in mind, E50M does not have great camo, so a lot of, like, basically, using this information, every other tier 10 medium tank, if you're over 400 meters away from them, you can fire in a bush and you basically won't get spotted. Now let's just, for example, assume, like I said, 470 meters view range, just to be safe. Now this distance moves up to 409 meters, which isn't as great, but there's still a lot of situations where you can use that. Now let's quickly go over another example. We'll use the EBR because I find I use this tactic of firing in the bush, even though it's not double bushed, most often in like light tanks because they usually have very good camo after firing. Another example is the Sturv. The Sturv also has excellent camo after firing, so that's another one. But let's just say let's just use the T100 because the T100 has a 100 millimeter gun, which is a lower caliber, so it's even better at firing in a bush. So let's plug in the numbers. 11.48 for after firing, which is extremely good on its own, and then 52.19 for its stationary camo. That gives us an effective camo, total camo when firing in a bush of almost 23%, which is pretty crazy. Let's say we're facing an enemy heavy tank, or just basically not an enemy light tank. Even medium tanks usually don't have higher than 470. You won't get spotted until 375 meters, which is absolutely absurd. And this value gets even higher for something like an EBR 75, which has an even smaller caliber gun, or a Sturv as well. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Now that's pretty much all I've got to say for this topic. And so if you get the gist of the video and you want to check out this calculator, or you're satisfied, then you can go now. But for those who are interested, I'm now going to go over the math, the equations that I use to actually get this end number. Okay, so what we have to do, like I said, for this equation to get your total camo is to add your vehicle's base camo after firing, which you can find in the garage right here. And then we add it to the camo that we get from the bush while firing, and that we derive from this equation here on this graph, which we basically just manually or which we basically just derived from testing. So here's the equation for this graph, which we got by plugging in the tank's RF value and relating it to testing, observing what camo we got from the bush during testing. And so the RF value, like I said, was this ratio here, 11.48 divided by 52.19, the firing versus stationary camo. And that here, if you look at the top, we take we basically just plug in the RF value right here into this equation, which we got from the graph, and then add on the camo after firing, and that gives us the total. So after we have our total camo, here we use the standard spotting distance equation, which you can find on the World of Tanks wiki. I'm just going to quickly show you an example of it, just to show you what all the terms are and the format of the equation. So x here is the distance you will be spotted at, and then the first term is the enemy view range, so 460 is what I have here. Then you subtract that from your total camo value, which for here, let's just look at this. Let's say for the T100, our total camo is 22.7%. And we convert that into a decimal. And that we multiply by, in parentheses, the enemy view range again, minus 50. And that will give us the distance we get spotted at. So for example, here, against an enemy with 460 view range, we would get spotted in a bush from 367 meters away. Now this minus 50 term never changes. It's always minus 50, and the reason why it's in this equation is because if you have, let's say, 100% camo, the maximum amount you can have, you'll still get spotted at, as you can see, 50 meters away. So basically just accounts for the proxy range. This equation is super helpful, even for not when you're firing in a bush. Like if you just want to know, let's say you're in a T100, you have 52% moving camo, and so we can just say an enemy has 470 meters view range, and we plug in our camo while moving, and it says we won't be lit until 256 meters away. So you just stay over 256 meters away when you're in a T100 when you're moving across an open field, and you'll be fine and won't be lit. Yeah, that's basically all it for the math. One last thing I wanted to mention is about how camo skills affects the distance you're spotted while in a bush. So one interesting thing to note about the RF value, the this divided by this, is that regardless of whether you have camo skill on your crew or not, or however you boost your camo on your tank, the value of the RF will always basically be exactly the same, because your camo after firing and your stationary camo both move up in the same proportion, regardless of what camo equipment you put on. I think it might be a little bit different for camo net, I'm not sure, but I know that for camo skill, for example, it makes no impact. So if you have a stock tank, and let's say it's an EBR 105, you have a 105mm gun, that'll give you about 10% camo while firing in a bush, and you have no camo skill on your EBR, you're still going to get that 10% camo while firing in a bush, and that will be irregardless of what your vehicle's camo value is. However, your camo after firing is affected by camo skill, so that will improve how well you, how much camo you have after firing in a bush. And I guess there is actually one more thing that I should talk about, and that's the fact that this convenient calculator, which I have here, it will not account for if the enemy vehicle has commander's vision system, so keep that in mind. However, I just want to say most tanks that use CVS anyways are light tanks, which are going to have like 480 meters plus view range, and they are also going to cut through the camo of the bush while you're firing. And so the chances of you getting spotted from max distance 445 is pretty much guaranteed anyways. You'll have very little wiggle room there. So I didn't really find it necessary, and it's just a bunch of extra work and makes it way more complicated. So just keep that in mind. And then for the very last portion of this video, I just wanted to show you a couple convenient places on certain maps where this actually comes into effect, that I've noticed personally in random battles. It doesn't happen often that this actually occurs, but I'll just give you a quick example here. So here's a random battle I was playing in the T100, which has excellent camo after firing. Plus, it has a low caliber gun, so it gets great camo when firing in a bush. Here, it's an enemy concept 1B, or concept 5, I should say. From 366 meters away, I fire at him and I don't get spotted because of because basically of the effect that I described in this video. Now, if this bush was not here, I 100% would have been spotted, but I calculated it, and he has to have less than 460 meters view range for me to have been able to pull this off. Which is another interesting thing you can do with the equations. You can reverse engineer what the enemy's view range might have been, or at least the range that it could be in. But yeah, for example, on Abby here on the 9 line, if you're playing in this bush here or this bush here, and your enemy light or your light tank on your team spots someone coming in, as you can see, it's like 405 meters away from around both sides, and you are unlikely to get lit if you're in a medium tank or something with a good camo and a lower caliber gun. On Cliff, when people are pushing the 9 line here, if you're in these bushes back on K5, you won't get spotted. For example, a lot of times someone will get spotted here. In this position, they're going to be shooting the middle. If you're inside this bush here, you will almost certainly not get lit, even though you're only like 410 meters away. From Fisherman's Bay, like the example I showed at the start of this video, you can do this. Highway, here's a super useful position. You can shoot people. You can actually spot them for yourself if you're in like a T100 or EBR as they cross the A line, and then you can shoot them while remaining unlit, even though you're not double bushing. And then occasionally, you know, this angle is helpful. This one is super helpful on Corellia. You play this bush here or this bush here, and enemies get spotted on the way in, and you don't even have to bother double bushing a lot of the time. You can even spot it for yourself and then shoot and still get away with it. If they have bad camo, you spot them at like 415 meters away, shoot them, and still won't get lit. Prokhorovka, C1, and H1 are common places where I use this. Redshire, this one is very, very useful. You play in B8 and shoot these corners here and you won't get lit. This angle on Sand River. And lastly, Serene Coast, if you're playing in like a light tank and you're spotting heavies crossing, you don't have to double bush. You can just shoot them straight up and you won't get lit. And it works from the other side, although I usually don't play this position. But yeah, that's basically all I have for this video. Hopefully it wasn't too like drawn out and lengthy. I think it kind of was, but hopefully you guys don't mind. I guess I didn't show this this spreadsheet, so I'm gonna link this spreadsheet as well. This is Iyouxin's camo calculator. This is more useful for just you plug in your vehicle's camo and its camo after firing and the enemy's view range, and it will give you spotting distances for CVS, for example. Although this calculator does not include while firing in a bush, like a transparent bush. It only includes an opaque bush. So as you can see here, 15 meters behind the bush. But I decided to include this as well in case you wanted another camo calculator for situations where you're just driving through an open field or something. But yeah, that's all for this video. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.